I think that had I not ever pursued this and tried it, I think that that would be a major regret for me. Even like before my deathbed, like I think had I gotten to a place of like in my 70s and like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I try it? Like kind of kicking myself.
UnLost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Today's guest is Brooke St. Sauver, the co-owner of two wonderful restaurants in Seattle, the Coop and Flute in Beacon Hill and the Dandy in Pioneer Square. Brooke's path to entrepreneurship started with a love of food and a bold decision to bake herb bread at 16 against her mom's advice. That spark simmered for decades until she finally took the leap into entrepreneurship after 40. She brings heart, hustle, and hospitality together in a way that's both inspiring and relatable to everyone. Brooke proves that age is but a number and that it's never too late to bet on yourself. Brooke, welcome to UnLost Cause.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here with you.
I know you're very busy because you have another restaurant just opening right now. So I'm going to start and just jump into it and ask you, can you share a bit about your upbringing and your first brush with baking or cooking?
Yeah, so grew up in a small town in Montana called Big Fork, and I was an only child for 7 years, and then my sister and my brother came along. I have a very close relationship with my mother, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, with my first brush with baking and cooking. So we've always had a very close, great relationship. So as David mentioned, when I was 16, there was a day that she had to run into Kalispell, which was the big city, not a city, but she had to run into town and go grocery shopping, and she was going to take my little brother and sister with her. And I was like, I'm going to stay home. I'd been flipping through cookbooks and had found this recipe for herb bread. And I said, I think I'm going to try and make bread today. I'm going to make some herb bread while you go to town. And she's like, Brooke, don't do that. She's like, bread is so hard. It's disappointing. I made rolls one time for chili for, your dad, and they turned out terrible. You had to soak them in that chili forever to even get them palatable. She's like, I just don't want you to be disappointed. And I kind of just, as all teenagers do, kind of like, whatever, Mom. She left, and I followed the recipe. She came home, and how she puts it is she walked into the house to this smell hitting her in the face of all of these baked herbs and baked yeasty bread and that beautiful smell. And she came into the kitchen to these two gorgeously tall loaves that were perfect, that were not dry, that were everything that bread should be and the way it should be. And she felt so bad. And we joke about it to this day. And she still, when we talk about this story, she says, I'm so sorry. I'm so glad you didn't listen to me. So we have a good chuckle about that. But that was kind of my first, thing that I did on my own that, I knew to be difficult, in theory, but I could read and I followed the directions and it was a success. And so then I was like, okay, I like doing this. This is fun. I like to eat. I like to make things. And that was it.
Wow. And this was when you were 16, but it sounded like you had baking or cooking experience prior to that. Do you remember the first time you either helped your mom or your dad, or you did something solo in the kitchen?
It was probably, honestly, with my grandma.
Okay.
So my grandma used to take care of me when I was little. Before my mom and my stepdad got married, my mom was a single mom for a bit in there. And so my grandma would take care of me. And she was always doing something in the kitchen, always baking. So that was probably I remember doing little, she would do a pie and she gave me my mini pie to do. And so I would do mini pies with her. So on my own, but not on my own. But that bread truly, I can't think of a time other than being in the kitchen with my grandma doing things on my own or helping her. That bread was probably the first time that I had really taken on something like that on my own in the kitchen. It wasn't the last time, obviously. That just kind of opened the door wide open. But yeah.
Well, it sounded like that bread was quite ambitious to do given your mom's warnings. So, with that success or triumph, what did you learn at that age that you might still kind of remember back to or recollect?
I mean, I think figuring out things on your own, like not always listening to other people, like what might be difficult for some may not be difficult for you, or what others experience may not be your own experience. And if you want to try something, try it. I mean, the worst that can happen is you mess up and you need to try again. Like, let's say I made that bread and it didn't turn out well. I don't think that would have stopped me from trying again. I've since done lots of different things that like haven't necessarily turned out the way that I would want them the first time. Like, so yeah, like, but if you want it bad enough, you just try again and hopefully get success. So here's a perfect example. So the Dandy, we sell, one of our little dishes that we do is ricotta gnudi, made famous by April Bloomfield of Spotted Pig in New York. And there was lots on that a few years ago in the media, but she was famous for this ricotta gnudi, which is basically the center of a ravioli. And it's pretty simple. It's ricotta, Parmesan cheese. It's a very simple mixture. But the technique comes in, like all of the recipes out there say that you roll it in semolina flour. And I first tried this recipe years ago, and it didn't matter how long I let these little cheese balls fit in the semolina every time. Like, I mean, I did Kenji Lopez Alt, like Serious Eats, like his testing. I did all of these things. But every time I would go to cook them, like I couldn't get them to hold together, like they'd fall apart. And so finally, like I was chatting with Inez, who is my right and my left hand and my heart and my soul at the kitchen and at the Coop and Flute. And we play together in the kitchen a lot. And she's like, why don't you try the gnocchi flour, which is 00 flour. Like, so not a semolina, not a coarser flour. She's like, why don't you do the same thing, but do the gnocchi flour? And I was like, that's brilliant. Like, why didn't I think of that? But that's why we're together and we play and bat things off of each other. Tried that. They're on the menu at the Dandy and they're delicious.
Oh.
And so like sometimes you just have to keep trying, and sometimes you talk with other people and get resources and get their ideas. But had I stopped, like, pursuing that,
of course,
you wouldn't get to enjoy them at the Dandy.
Yeah. And Brooke, growing up, did you have any entrepreneurial role models, either family or friends? Because it's one thing to have an idea and a passion, but it's another thing to turn it into a business, right? So I'm curious if you had any role models that you looked up to and you learned from.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So my stepdad always had his own businesses. Like, so he started his first, I mean, I guess when I was little, he worked for other people, but it was always a goal of his to have his own business. And so I guess when I was in junior high, maybe like 6th, 7th grade, middle school, he started a business. And so I got to watch him have a couple different businesses over the course of growing up. So he had a sandblasting business where he did everything from car parts to big, beautiful home, like log homes that he would do. And then we also had a state-inspected wild game processing facility on our property. And so,
interesting.
Again, going back to food, I was around butchering a lot growing up, and that lent to my passion about food. So I've been wrapping meat since I was like, 9. But anyways, I always got to see that and how hard he worked, but he never had to work for anybody else. And so there was that example. And then my grandpa, he had his own tree removal business and he snowplowed in the winter. I mean, we're talking small town Montana. So like no big companies or anything like that. But yeah, both my grandpa, Herbie, and my stepdad, supported families with their small businesses.
Yeah. And then while you were growing up, your stepdad and your grandpa, did you ever have that inkling that you wanted to start your own business down the road?
Always.
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 I love it.
Yeah. I always have dreamed and that like, ooh, what if I could do this? What if I did that? Like, and most of the time it always was just kind of like a dream and a fun place for my brain to go. I have fever brain. And always am like playing I call it Let's Make a Dream. And in my head and like kind of explore different ideas in my head, but I never really made the jump to actually do it because I got focused pretty young, like in high school, that like I decided, even though like I had these little inklings of entrepreneurship that I wanted, I also wanted to go to school and I wanted to be in a city and I wanted to have a big job. And I decided that going down the path of corporate retail, like I wanted to be a buyer, fashion and all of that. And so I set out a plan for myself. I've always been very like goal oriented and decided I was going to be a buyer. And so that's what I did. So that took over very young. So even though, and all through that career too, I had inklings of like, oh, but what if I did this? Like, and that's when hospitality, like someday I just want a bed and breakfast or a little cafe or something all throughout while I was a buyer. But that corporate job took hold quick. And so I did that for over 20 years.
Got it. So we'll transition and talk about that in a minute. But what I'm curious is like, when did that first spark of like marrying this love of food? Because I think you mentioned you used to host dinner parties and really enjoy that. But when did that first spark say, entrepreneurship plus baking or food, perhaps I want to do something there? When was that, I guess, lightly kindled?
That would have been kindled like truly like seriously kindled in my mid to late 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, is when those two dots like crossed. I love to cook and I love to cook for people and I love to cook for, if it was my boyfriend or whoever, or friends. I always loved to do that as like a hobby. And that was something that like from the time I started cooking when I was in high school, through college, through the early parts of my career, I always saw it as more of just something that I could do as a hobby that fulfilled me, that it was a way that I showed love to the people that I loved.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until my late 20s that there were some other things that happened where I was kind of like, oh man, could I really do this someday?
Yeah, well, that's a great transition. Thanks for teeing it up for me. So I'm sure the community at UnLost Cause would love to know more about that. So in your late 20s, you start thinking about, maybe I want to do, I think you mentioned Airbnb or a restaurant, right? So tell me more about that process. Was there an aha moment where you went to a great restaurant and it just all clicked into place? Or was it a slow boil where you're like, maybe this, maybe that, and it started coming together?
Sort of a slow boil. So also like kind of teeing it up a little bit more. So my first restaurant job was in like my sophomore junior year of high school. I worked at a local restaurant in Big Fork called Showtime, and Chef Blue Funk, amazing cook and still one of the best restaurants ever, I think. He retired several years ago, but he and his wife Rose owned this restaurant and it was the best restaurant in town, and I got to work there, and that furthered my love of like great food and restaurants. And so like I always loved going to great restaurants. In my late 20s, I had just finished so I worked at the Bon Marché that went through as a buyer, that went through the nameplate changes to Macy's, and then they consolidated their regional buying offices. And at that point, I was 28, and I decided that I had gone straight from college into the buying office. And like, I'd never really taken any time. I went from high school, like I started summer quarter. I took no break, like ever, to just enjoy or travel. So I took my severance and I went to Europe for a month.
Oh, wow.
And traveled. And then I decided to come back to Montana and spend some time with my family. And this was in June of 2008. And so the world changed in June, like that summer of 2008, like with the big recession and the economy crash. And so when I got back from Europe, I was in the process of, trying to work out my flight down to San Francisco to go interview for a watch buying job. And that was put on hold. I had already interviewed at Nordstrom for some things here in Seattle, and they went through a reorg. And so at that point, I was like in Montana at my parents' house, and like all the job opportunities that I was pursuing kind of dried up. So I was like, I'm just going to take a breather and hang out here for a little bit and wait for the dust to settle and figure out what I want to do. So it was at that point, there was a beautiful home that was about a half a mile from my parents' house that had been ran as a bed and breakfast at one point in time. And it wasn't on the market for sale, but I knew the owners were interested in selling it. And I just was like, could I do this? Could I move back to Montana and could I find a way to buy this big, beautiful home and run it as a bed and breakfast? And just started fantasizing about I could do dinners and I could cook breakfast and blah, blah, blah. I could be back with my family. That was the moment where I was like, I really want to do this. I want to do something that involved cooking for other people on a professional level and being a host, inviting people into my home, my space, creating a space for people.
Oh, that's beautiful. So when you see this house and you're daydreaming and fantasizing, did you keep this mainly to yourself and journal about it? Or did you talk with friends and family members? And did they also know that you're starting to have these ambitions or these dreams of doing something with food or a restaurant or hospitality, Airbnb?
Oh, I talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a talker.
Mm-hmm.
I keep something. I'm in my head a lot too, but I talked about this. I wanted to talk about it, and I talked a lot about it to my mom and my grandma, and mostly them. So just how could I do this? I got books. I ordered books off of Amazon, about running inns and running bed and breakfasts and all of that. And even chatted with the owners of the home and so here's the deal, you're probably getting to a question like this, but but I was serious about it. And I was like, okay, I really could do this. I really want to do this. I want to see if I can make this work. So I went in and I even I talked to a bank about small business loans. I very loosely, and then, talked to the owners of this home, and I think that they would have carried the contract for me. But here's the deal. I had no money. Even though I had spent at this point 8 years in a corporate job, Seattle's expensive. I didn't budget well. I didn't have enough money. I had a little bit of money, but not a lot. Not enough to put down any money on this space for them to carry it. So...
And when you were sharing and talking with your mom, your grandma about these aspirations, what was their reaction? Because sometimes I talk to guests and their family members are, no, stay in your corporate job. It's safe, it's secure. Other folks are like, wow, that's great. Go for it. Where were they on the spectrum?
My mom learned her lesson from the bread. She was supportive. No, shit, that was kind of a joke, but serious. No, both my mom and my grandma were super supportive. And I think that at that point, having me back after being gone for 9-ish, almost 10 years, I think both of them were we would love to have you back. And they were so supportive. And they saw corporate jobs are stressful, and I was 28, I was still pretty young and pretty stressed, and they liked seeing that, I think the idea of them oh my gosh, if she could figure out how to do this, I would be just up the road from my grandma, literally a 2-minute walk, and then a 15-minute walk to my mom's house, right there. And so they were both, they were super supportive and over the moon. And I think that they had seen what I'd done and got myself, achieved my goal of being a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they were very much oh, she sets her mind to it and she can do it. They were supportive.
Wonderful. But then reality still hits because there's the bank account and et cetera. So it sounds like after the great financial crash, you didn't end up moving on that opportunity, but you ended up doing something else. So can you share with the audience what ended up happening?
Yeah. So the reality hit and I still needed to work. Like I needed to make money. I've had a job before even I was probably legally able to work. I used to stuff bunny parts. Like we had a friend who made these beautiful Victorian like fancy bunnies that she would sell like at retail. And I would stuff the part with her with stuffing. And so, like, I've just always worked. And so I started looking for work and I ended up getting hired at a television station, a local NBC affiliate, and selling advertising space. And I moved to Missoula, Montana, a couple hours south of where my parents were, my parents and my grandparents, and moved down there. And my love of food. Selling advertising didn't last long. It was not a good fit for either of us. But I met great people. I met my ex-husband, who is still a very good friend of mine, but made great friends. And really, that jaunt in Missoula really just further ignited my passion for food. And it was right at the height of like the slow food movement and pull on. And I was introduced to the Weston Price Foundation, which is all about traditional foods and traditional cultures and fermentation and like raw dairy. And like, I was into it. I was making my own yogurt. I was part of a co-op. Like there were great like farmers markets. And so I had stopped doing the corporate advertising and I got myself a little job at a sustainable building supply and design store. And it was just the owner and I, and it was great. And I had time to do all of these other things, to make my yogurt, to make bread, to do butter, to try that nudie recipe for the first time and fail. So that really, I dreamt about having a cafe there.
Okay.
In Missoula.
Yes. So then you went from the corporate advertising and now you're engrossed in the local ecosystem of food, raw dairy and so forth, which obviously I'm sure is fantastic for, the future restaurateur Brooke. Then after that, there's still a gap before you make that jump. What happened between that time period and then before you ended up having both we'll touch upon the financial and the emotional and everything ready to make that first leap?
Yeah. So, I mean, I still had no money to put into like opening a cafe. There's also weird things in Missoula that like to be profitable in a restaurant, it's kind of like having a beer and wine license at minimum is necessary. And there's some really funky rules in Missoula County. There's like only a finite amount and they're very, very expensive. Very expensive. And a lot of times it's a lottery and you only get one if there's another business that goes out of business. Like, then that opens one up. It's a big, long, convoluted story. So anyways, it didn't happen. And there's that thing like that happens with corporate America. Like I got bored in Missoula too. Like there was that little itch to be back and doing something that like doing what I was comfortable like as a buyer. And so like I was tired of not making as much money as I had made at one point. And knowing that like I have these dreams and if I ever have a chance of pursuing these dreams or even just retiring someday, like I need to do more than what I was doing there and then. And so I was like, I need to pursue and I need to go back into corporate. And so ended up pursuing jobs. I was interviewing in LA with Ross. I flew to New York with Ross, like to interview. And then there were some jobs that came available at Nordstrom. Some of my peeps from my Macy's and Bon Marché days ended up at Nordstrom. And long story short, I ended up getting a job back at Nordstrom. And so in 2010, I moved back to Seattle and went back into corporate retail.
Yeah. So now that you're back in Seattle and back into corporate retail, did you ever feel like that vortex or that was going to suck you into that world and maybe the grasp on your dream of starting a place was loosening? Or did you feel, since you were a planner that you mentioned, that this was the right step to accumulate a little bit of financing to use that as the stepping stone to further get closer to that dream?
what you just said, the latter. So like I knew that like it wasn't fully formed that I'm going to go back into corporate retail so I can get enough money or whatever it is to open a restaurant or whatever. But it was, I'm going to get back into corporate retail to secure my financial future so I have choices. And I don't have to do this for forever. Like I had a timeline for myself on what I was going to do and how frugally I was going to live out here. I was going to do it very differently than I did in my 20s. Because at this point, I'm like in my 30, like I guess in 2010, I'm 30. So I was like, I've learned how to do things a little bit different. I'm going to live more frugally. I'm going to save more money. And like, here's my timeline so I can do something else someday. That would be hospitality cafe driven. But it wasn't always with the goal of like, at that point, it wasn't, I'm going to do this.
Got it. And then in the off hours, like the nights and weekends, are you walking around checking out new cafes? Are you cooking or baking dinner parties? Or are you just fully back immersed in this corporate job? Are you still tending to that dream a bit?
Definitely still tending to the dream a bit. So I, at that point in my life, I went out to eat very little because I got a little funny about like all the processed foods and the oils and everything, and which I still believe like all of those things, but I'm also a lot more generous with myself than what I used to be. But I cooked for myself a lot. So I was very much engrossed and enrobed in my job. But every weekend I shopped at the farmer's market. I lived in West Seattle and we had a great, there still is a great farmer's market over there. So I would go shopping and I would do all my shopping at the farmer's market. I would do all of my meal prep for the week. I would make myself like a few big things and I made all of my own food. I took my lunch every day to work, at my desk. And so I was still always preparing food and trying new recipes and cooking for people whenever I got the chance. So my little cousin, Mackenzie, had moved to Seattle. It was funny. I was 13 when she was born, and I moved to Seattle when I was 19. And so there wasn't a lot of overlap growing up, but like I knew who she was. I went to her baby shower when her mom had her. So she ends up moving to Seattle. And she moved to West Seattle, and I would have her over every Sunday. So we became friends and close, and I started doing family dinner for she and I, and would cook at any opportunity that I could.
Wow, that's beautiful. And then let's fast forward a bit to the year or two before you make the jump to do the Coop and Flute. Like, what were you doing? Were you still working at Nordstrom at that time?
I was. Yeah, I was at the Rack and having some of the best business that had ever had in my career. Like I was on a killer team, my business partner kicked butt, and we were so in sync, like truly like the funnest job I've ever had. And we were taking names. Like we stood on the stage, we got awarded, we maxed bonus, like there were lots of things. Like, so there were a couple years in there that were like super good. And I worked my butt off and it was very stressful. And so in those 2 years, I also had started, I had gotten a divorce. Like we skipped over some time. I had gotten a divorce. And in that couple of years prior to making this jump, stressful, but really great business, also met my current husband. And so we started dating, and he happened to be in the service industry.
Wow.
And so he has been a career service person. He's done every single role that you can possibly imagine, back of the house, front of the house, you name it, he's done it, and also loves to cook. And so we had started dating, and he loved to play Let's Make a Dream as well. And so we would bat like ideas around at each other about like businesses we could do together. And yeah, so that was kind of the couple years leading up. Stressful, but successful in my other career.
And then, so when you meet your current husband, his name is Kurt, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So, and you're doing Let's Make a Dream. It sounds like you two are in sync and the dream gets better as you're going versus like it's getting rocky or there's kind of friction like, oh, you don't like that idea? Well, why not? But it sounds like you two are simpatico and having a lot of fun dreaming about this. Is that correct?
Always. always. Because we used to travel a lot in the beginning of our relationship. And so wherever we went, we would be like, ooh, if we lived here, what kind of a business would we have? And it was usually a restaurant or a cafe, but like it was always a little different depending on the area that like we were at, whether we were in Mexico in a small little like fishing village because we like off the beaten path kind of things, or if it was in my hometown of Big Fork, like what would we do there? Or in Ireland, we did a big trip to Ireland, and like what would we do there? Like if we lived over there. But yes, we were always pretty in sync and in line and excellent communicators with one another, because you have to be when you're in a marriage and when you're a business owner together.
Exactly.
Yes,
and you want to stay married.
Yes, we were always like this in terms of in sync. That being said, like there were ideas that were like, oh, well, what do you think about this? And like he'd be like, well, no for X, Y, and Z. Or I'd be like, I don't know. So one of my business trips to New York, my business partner, Laura, who is still one of my very, very good friends, she found this little champagne bar on the Lower East Side called Airs. And it was a true champagne bar. Like they didn't have a big food program. They had some cheeses and they did a little raw bar, like some oysters, but and it was really just champagne, some sparkling wine. But very cool vibe, and they're very down to earth, almost a 90s party girl vibe, not stuffy or snooty. And so we went there and we had a really good time. Lots of different champagnes by the glass, which a lot of places you don't see a big champagne by the glass list because champagne is expensive and it's an investment. But I was like, really love this idea. And the girl who started it, like part of her thing was that she didn't do as high of a markup on her champagne. Not that it made it cheap. It wasn't cheap still, but it was a much more approachable price point than what you would find at a typical restaurant on their by the glass list for a glass of champagne. And so she was able to offer her customer more breadth of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that. And so I came home from a business trip and I was like, all right, honey. I'm like, what do you think of like a champagne tavern? Because we knew we wanted to do food, like we wanted a bigger food program. And both of us are brunchers, like we love brunch. And I was like, we would need the restaurant component. So like kind of like vibe being like tavern vibe and like have it feel like us, like we like very dark and this, I'm sitting in my house, like this is my dining room and like we like dark interiors. And so we aren't clean or minimalistic or mid-century modern. We're a little bit more like dark Victorian. And so like old European vibe. And so we started like talking about like spatially what it would be, like vibey, like just fun, down to earth, like taverny, like have that approach where people can come in and not feel like they have to know anything about champagne. Like they can come in and they can try the flight and they can figure out what they like. And like, there's no judgment. We're not snooty. And Kurt was like, that could work. And so thus we started like taking our dream further and chatting more.
Great. So when he said that can work, it sounded like that set the wheels in motion for a whole host of other things. Can you share with the audience, like once that gate has opened, like what were the next steps that you two were doing together?
We talked a lot about like loosely, like we still hadn't sat down and actually put pen to paper in terms of a business plan.
Okay.
Like we kind of just started like, okay, that could work. We finally felt like we had landed on something that we could take further in our brain and like explore more, like what would our menu look like? Like, would we do brunch? Like, what kind of space would we look for? How many seats do you think that it would be? Like, we got to like start like fleshing through more of the details, like if it were a real business.
Mm-hmm.
But we still weren't like at that point, like, okay, when could we like foresee ourselves doing this? Is this like a plan after like a retirement plan, or is this like sooner but later, like kind of a plan? We weren't really sure. We just started talking more, like fleshing through a little bit more of the details that like would go into a business plan, but we weren't really there in terms of putting it to a business plan. And then I had the best year of business in my corporate career that I'd ever had. And I wasn't sleeping at night. I was super stressed out and just all the things. And we typically went to Mexico in the spring, like usually like in February, we'd go to Mexico for the week, like when it's, when you're like, I can't take the gray anymore.
The gloom here.
And I couldn't even get on a plane. I was like, I don't want to get on a plane. I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to be in my home. I'm exhausted. I'm burned out. And like, I could cry right now, like remembering how I felt. And Kurt's like, let's write the plan. So he's like, let's take our time off work. And instead of going to Mexico and getting on a plane, let's take our time off that we typically would have taken off. And let's sit down and actually like write the business.
Unbelievable. So Brooke, I know you got emotional, which got me emotional, but I do have to ask is, you have the best year ever, right? Like financially. And I know that was going to be a step on, getting ready to do something towards your dream. A lot of people's society expectations be like, wow, Brooke, you just had the best year. Just do another one or two more of those before you jump. But then it felt like the mental stress was starting to manifest it physically where you didn't even want to go on an Uber or go to the airport. So I just have to ask, did you have any of that reservation, or when Kurt mentioned, let's write the plan, you were like awash with relief, or were you torn because you're like, well, just maybe 1 or 2 more years of this great financial windfall and that would make it much easier?
I wasn't. I was ready by this time. By this time I was ready because even writing the plan, like it didn't mean that like once the plan was written, like it was still a matter of finding the right space, the right location. And there's still a process within that. And I knew that. And so I knew that like I couldn't just like, even though the plan was written, I knew that like I wasn't going to quit my job. Like I knew that I was still going to be there. But having the business plan written and like having something that was like, here, I have a plan. I have a business plan. We flushed through all the things. I've done the financial flow, which is, I was a buy planner at Nordstrom. So meant that like I did all the financial pieces of the business. And so did all of that. Like I have this thing. And now it's just a matter of still like shopping for the right location. And so I knew that I was still going to be working for some time. So I wasn't married to the idea of doing it just a couple more years to bank more money. It was more like, I have this plan. So now I'm going to keep my job, but I have this plan now and I'm going to start looking for the right place to execute it.
Got it. And in the past, when you were looking at that lovely B&B in Montana, you immediately went and ordered books on Amazon about how to run it and so forth. When you were creating the plan, did you also have all these books and resources, or did you intuitively know from your years of corporate world how to come up with it?
So it's funny. I went to the Art Institute of Seattle and I did fashion merchandising and marketing. And their program, like through the program, like basically what you come out with as a fashion merchandising and marketing student, or at least what you did in like 1999, was a business plan. Like they taught you how to write a business plan. Now, this is like, as we're talking about, like UnLost Causes, like I'm, 40 at this point, like with this, gonna write a business plan with my even older husband. And like, I didn't remember all of the details, but so the book that we got the Business Plans for Dummies book and kind of used that like as our guidepost of going through. I mean, clearly I knew that like the financial piece was a big part of it. And I could do that because that's what I had been doing for my whole career.
Yes.
Like my whole corporate career. So that was I think that's is oftentimes the most daunting part for people. And that part was the easy part for me.
For folks like in your shoes who have this dream, how important was it to write a business plan, especially because you have a co-founder or a husband, and also to like codify it in one like document? Was that very important, or in hindsight wasn't really that important and maybe you overthought it?
I think it was important. I think it's important. I think it's like, even though things change and evolve, I think it's really good to like having a plan is good. I am also a planner by nature. Like, I mean, I spent over 20 years doing it and getting paid for it. Like, I like having a plan, but I really think that, like, from a guidepost perspective, like, I think it helps set direction. Not everybody may need it, but I found it very beneficial. Kurt found it very beneficial. And when we were writing it together, it really helped us, like, flesh it out together. So we weren't just like, there were things that would come up that we would talk about, like, maybe he thought of, like, the menu, for instance, like, when we started really talking about menu and how and what we would offer, like, there were a lot of times where there were some differences that, like, we had to chat through. Size of restaurant, there were differences there. I mean, had I gotten my way, we would have had a little 12-seater, like, somewhere that was just teeny tiny that just Kurt and I could run. And would have that worked? I don't know. Maybe we never pursued that financial plan because, like, Kurt kind of pushed back on it. He's like, no, we can have a small place, but we need more seats than that, like, to do anything with, like, to support us. And it's like, okay, fine, you're right. Like, I can give up my little, like, 12-seater, just he and I kind of.
Yeah.
Yay.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic takeaway for the listeners is, like, if you have a plan, it just makes you think about all these edge cases, and to write it down is a great commitment exercise, especially if there's a co-founder involved. So now let's get to the
100%.
fun stuff. So you have a plan. So next thing is you got to find a place. And I know that in retail or in restaurants, location is super important. And then the rent can be crushing one way or the other if it's too big, or, as Kurt mentioned, if it's too small to support the unit economics of the place. So tell us about how the search came for the location.
Yeah. So we wrote this plan in March of 19, end of February, beginning of March of 2019. And then, like, in the summer, like, we're good partners for each other because Kurt pushes me. I can get comfortable really easily and, like, kind of, like, even though I dream big, I can get comfortable. And it's funny, people who are like, know that I'm a Taurus, they're like, I'm lazy. No, I'm not lazy, but, like, you know, you can get comfortable and stuff. And so Kurt really, like, that summer, he's like, let's start looking for a place. And I was like, oh, and so we started looking that summer, and it was funny because we knew that Beacon Hill, we wanted to be in a neighborhood. So that was part of it. Like, in our business plan, we're like, we know that we're going to have a destination product, but we also want to be a neighborhood vibe too. And we really, there were a couple, like, we had been going to Bar del Corso since they opened up on Beacon Hill, and it was one of our favorites. And we loved that Jerry and Gina, the owners of Bar del Corso, were very present in their business, and you could feel that owner operator. We talked about that in our business plan, that, like, we wanted to emulate that. And we really loved the Beacon Hill neighborhood, and it's close to our house. And so we'd walked the neighborhood. And it was funny because we walked by this little travel agency that was up there right next door to Oak. And then this new restaurant, Homer, at the time was opening, which was very cool looking. And then there was this little travel agency kind of in between the two of them that there was a real estate sign, like, for lease in the window. And we peeked in the windows. We're like, God, this location would be amazing. Like, right next door to Oak, like, Bar del Corso's just down the road. This cool new restaurant Homer's going in. Like, this would be great, but, like, oh my God, like, it's a travel agency. And, like, the build out on it would be insane. And, like, we're peeking in the windows, and it's like, oh my God, like, this would be, like, dream location, but nah. And so we moved on with our lives and looked at some other places over the course of the summer. Kurt, like, laid some things out. And then that fall, like, fall time rolls around again, and Miss Messy Stressy here, like, you know, is, like, feeling the punch again, and, like, okay, we have this business plan. Let's get serious and, like, look at some other places and get a real estate agent. Let's get a commercial real estate agent. So we got the commercial real estate agent. Kurt sets up some things to look at because he was going to field all the places because I don't have time to like go look at all the places. And so I'm like, you go look and you pick out the best ones and I'll come look at them when you think that you have the best ones. The very first place that our commercial real estate agent took us to was that little travel agency
Oh
of
my
Beacon Hill.
God. Talk about fate. The universe is conspiring, Brooke.
So is where we are. We signed the lease in December of 2019
Wow.
on the Genesis travel space. We have Brett and Tita are our landlords, mom and pop. It was their travel agency business. Their home was above the business. They raised their boys, but now they live down in Tacoma. And we're just looking for to do some other things with the building. And so, we presented our business plan. They really liked it. They liked what we were going to bring to the community. And yeah, so we took that on. I mean, in the meantime, I had also done some financial things and like was putting together our financial package to be able to fund this. So yeah, like that space that we very first looked at when we walked through the neighborhood in Beacon Hill is what we took a big bite.
Yeah. Well,
for our first venture.
I love how it comes full circle. And however, I can't help but ask, the time frame is right before COVID, is right? So then how did that obviously ripple through your business plan and your execution and your timeline?
Oh, it ripped right through it. So yeah. So timing could not have been worse. I mean, in terms of just everything. I mean, worse and better. Like it all ended up working out. And I kind of believe that things just work out. Like it's been my experience. I'm knocking on wood there. It's been my experience in life that things just have a way of working out the way that they're supposed to. And so I had put together this plan, had mustered up some financing to get this build out done, which wasn't going to be cheap. And I planned in an extremely generous contingency into my planning budget because I know that things never go to plan, things never come in on plan. And so I had planned this gorgeous contingency and I'm like, you've done this for your whole life. Like you're going to be good. COVID hits. And like we had negotiated into our lease that basically like our commencement. So we negotiated 6 months of rent abatement. And so like to hopefully be able to get our renovation done in that amount of time before we could open. And then our commencement though on that, like where we started that 6 months was not going to come until the change of use permit came through and we actually got key to the space to go in and demo. So that took, because of COVID, the change of use took like 6 months. So we signed the lease in December. We got keys in August of 2020. And then our clock started for 6 months. We opened in June of 2022.
Wow.
It was long. It was hard. And it cost about 7 times what we had planned.
Jeez. So
there was definitely a point in there, and I'm going to talk about the silver lining of COVID, because I'm like, it couldn't have happened at the worst of, the timing couldn't have been worse. However, there was a big silver lining in there. So blew my budget out of the water. Money's gone. Halfway through this renovation, our time clock is running out. I'm going to have to start paying rent on this place, whatever. And before we had went into pre-COVID, when I'm getting all the finances together, I learned that the Small Business Association doesn't lend to new businesses. They're great for loans at that point in time on businesses where you've had 2 years under your belt and you can show, a good solid, in the good, profit. So that's when they're really great at this point in time. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to either need an investor or need to come up with this on my own. I figured some other stuff out, but I'm like, there aren't any loans available to me from a business loan. So what happened during COVID, though, is so many businesses went out that they redid some things, and there are a lot more places out there now and Small Business Association backs some of them. I'm going to talk about one specifically here in a minute, but I was able to get a business loan to finish the build out, which was amazing. And found out about it through our banker at Home Street, because I went to try and take more money out of my house. Like, I own a home that has had great equity. And so I was like, I know that I have more money in my house, but they're like, no, we're not going to let you do that. But here's another option for you.
Wow.
And they put me on to Business Impacts Northwest, and which is backed by the Seattle Business or Economic Development Fund, Seattle Economic Development Fund, which is a part of the SBA. Anyways, they help new businesses, and they help primarily minority businesses. So like I'm a woman, and even though Kurt is my business partner, I'm majority owner of the business. And so I was able to get help and able to finish the business. Or finish the build out. So had COVID never happened, would have we been able to execute in a timely manner and stay within budget? Who knows? Like, things have a way of popping up. Like, would have it cost as much? No, probably not. Would have something else happened? Who knows? But I do know that, like, because of COVID, at least I was able to get it funded and finish it.
Yeah.
And we were able to open.
Wow. What a wonderful story in terms of perseverance and grit, because there's so many opportunities to get off the freeway and take that off ramp and call a loss, but you kept plugging away to open the restaurant. So now let's fast forward. So the day that you opened to the public, and at that evening when you close the doors, are you feeling elated, exhausted, relieved, or some combination thereof? Like, what was Brooke feeling that day when you closed the door from the first day you opened to the public?
All of it. Because, like, yeah, as you mentioned, like, we just opened the Dandy, and I'm exhausted right now, and I get emotional when I'm exhausted. And so, yeah, thinking about these things and talking about things, I get emotional because I'm tired. But yeah, all those things. We closed the door that night, and like Kurt and I, there was crying and hugging, and like we did it, and like, but just like true exhaustion, but all of the emotions. Like, you can't help but feel all of the emotions and proud. Like, we did it. Like, couldn't believe that we did it. So yeah, like all of those things was really exciting. Yeah, we felt all those things. And we continued to feel those things. I remember, like, because like I said, we opened in June, and then the first week of February, we closed for a week, the February of 2023, to just like have a little break, like a break for our staff, a break for us. And I remember I was looking through my phone earlier at like pictures. I was looking for a specific picture, and anyways, came across these pictures of the night of the 31st because of January. We had a staff party, and then we were all going on vacation. And there's pictures of Kurt and I, and we're just like wide-eyed and like crazy face, like for the camera. And I remember that night too, like the night that we closed the doors for the first day we opened, and then this day that like before we're going on break, like the first break that we've had like since we opened, because it's been nonstop, and we were so tired, but like we felt all those emotions that night too. I remember like it was just he and I like at the restaurant, and like we were packing up like, you know, the partial bottles from the party and the food, leftover food and all this stuff, and getting the restaurant like locked down before we hit the road the next morning, and just being like, I can't even, like, we did it. Like, just being proud of like the team that we just celebrated, like all of our staff, and getting to celebrate with them. And so we still have those moments, I guess is what I'm saying.
Great.
Like, we had that moment on that first day, but there are definitely still the moments where it's like, I can't believe like we've done
We're
this.
living the dream. And has your mom and grandma had a chance to visit the restaurant? And I'm assuming they must be incredibly proud as well.
Yeah. So my mom has been out a lot. My mom comes about once a year. And so she's been to the Flute several times. My grandma came for the first time this last summer, and then they're getting ready to come again at the beginning of May. So I'm excited for that. But my mom's been a lot, and both of them are very proud. I have a recipe, my cobbler recipe on my my dessert menu at the Flute is my Aunt Ev's. Like I have some like family recipes on the menu, which is kind of fun. So yeah, they're very, very proud.
Yes, no, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned earlier that debilitating stress that you had after the best year ever at Nordstrom, and you couldn't even go to Mexico. Now, I imagine you still have stress, but is it different, or has that cloud lifted, or is there different shades of that? Can you share with the listeners like that type of stress and what has happened to it?
Yeah, definitely still stress. It is a different type of stress, I would say. You know, the thing about working for yourself is that like you're accountable to yourself. Like when you work for somebody else, like it's just different. Like there's stress and like you're performing for somebody else when you work for somebody else. And like there's just a different level of responsibility to that. As a business owner, I'm responsible to my team. And I'm responsible for people's livelihoods, which is a whole different type of stress. But it is different. Like that there are some nights that I don't sleep, but it's not like it was. And just having more flexibility in my time, there are things that like I know that like if I'm having a really tough time, like I can schedule at Bywater, and I can go do a sauna and a cold plunge in Golden Gardens like at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning if I want to, or 8 a.m. on a Friday morning. And I don't need to worry about like telling my boss I'm going to be late to work. Like that doesn't matter. Like, so there isn't that accountability factor to somebody else and being like, I got to go do this to take care of myself and make sure that like, you know, I can do some form of stress release. So yeah, there's still stress. It's different. It's more of that like making sure that we're on point. So, you know, for our people that we employ. And specifically like right now, like one of the things that weighs heavy on my head is there have been threats of a 200% tariff on champagne and wines from Europe. My businesses would cease to exist and how they exist today if that goes into effect. And that affects like, it doesn't even just affect my business. It affects a lot of my suppliers and all of that. So like, that's something where it's like, okay, like, is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Like, how will I pivot? Like if, you know, that does happen. And to be honest with you, I haven't put much brain power on how I'm going to pivot if that does actually happen, because I'm kind of, to be honest, like I'm like, just really hope that it doesn't happen. You know, but if it does, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and there will be pivoting. But so those are the types of things that like I worry about now.
And then on top of that, you endeavored to open just recently your second establishment, the Dandy in Pioneer Square. So what inspired you to take another big bite in the restaurant world?
Because Kurt and I are crazy. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, we are a little bit, but no, I think that we wanted something, as I mentioned earlier, the Coupe and Flute cost a lot more than what we had anticipated. And so like, we still have goals of like retirement and like that sort of thing. And margins in restaurants are tight. They just are. And Kurt and I wanted another business. We wanted something that felt a little bit more urban. We wanted to be like in a neighborhood that was more highly foot trafficked. We wanted something where it wasn't necessarily a full kitchen restaurant like at the Dandy. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but we don't have a full kitchen at the Dandy. We have a kitchen. We serve food, but it's not the same as the Coupe and Flute. We wanted something that was pretty turnkey, like just kind of put our brand of lipstick on the pig and like open for business and start making money, essentially, and be able to give ourselves a little bit of a raise and pay ourselves a little bit more. Was kind of where we were going with that. And we've got such an amazing team at the Coupe and Flute. Like we've been really lucky. Most of our team has been with us from the beginning or close to the beginning. We're just really lucky in that way. And so the Coupe and Flute is at a place where it runs itself quite nicely. So we felt like we could take on something else. And so we started looking at places a year ago in December. And the place that we ended up in, another funny story about the space that we ended up in, we used a different commercial real estate team this time. And they happened to be regulars at the Coop and Flute. We didn't know that when we were recommended these women, and Kurt called them. And they happened to be regulars of ours, and they were like, oh my gosh, like we come in all the time, like we're so excited. And so they knew what we were about, like, which kind of was just serendipitous. So they had put together this list of tours for us, and at the last minute, this space came in, and they sent it over, and they're like, hey, like, do you want to add this space to our day? And I was like, oh my God, we're already looking at like 8 places. And I looked at the pictures of this space, and they were so modern and industrial and minimalistic. And I was like, no, I'm like, it's too modern, because I was just like daunted by the list of all the places that we were going to look at. And there were some goodies in there. And I was like, no, I'm like, we don't need to see this. And then Susanna like comes back, and she's like, so she's like, the property manager, like the big head property manager, is really excited and is planning to be there on this tour. You're going to do it.
You're like, okay, so, I guess we're going.
We're like, okay, great. Oh, so anyways, so we did this tour. They ended up squeezing in on the very front end. Like, so we started earlier, which was fine. But it ended up being the right space. And I'm so glad. Like, that's the other thing. Like, listen to your commercial real estate agents. Like, sometimes they know best. Not sometimes. They do know best. But anyway, so it's the space that we ended up in.
And did this space also, was it a former restaurant so that you can re-leverage a lot of the infrastructure, unlike the Coop and Flute? Or did you have to do extensive build out as well?
No. We didn't have to do extensive build out in terms of the kitchen, which is part of the reason why we took it.
Great.
So that being said, like, it was a wine bar and bottle shop prior to us taking it over. We will be doing more of a food program out of the kitchen than I believe what they did. So like, there's no hood system. Like we have induction burners and stuff there. So like, we do what we can, and we'll be able to do a decent little food program. And we have some nice stuff that we do at night, but we're not like a full restaurant like we are at the Coop and Flute. Like, there's no fryer. We're known for our French fries up at the Coop and Flute. So like, people will come down and be like, oh, do you have the French fries? It's like, no, we don't. We do not. But anyways, and I don't plan, I have no plans right now of putting in a hood system there. Like, I don't want to invest the money there. Like, I think that we can do it nice enough. I'll talk about what we're doing there in a minute, but it's nice. Like, right now we are feeling very vibey, like after work drinks and appetizers, which is different than the Coop and Flute. We want to, we're brother-sister vibes, but we're different. Like, we're the same, but different. And we want to give people, a reason to go to both spaces.
Yes. And kudos to you. I was just checking up on the Yelp reviews. I know that can be the blessing or bane of most restaurateurs, but excellent reviews. And a lot of them said, oh, we went to the Coop and Flute and we came here and it was so awesome. So you've translated something that I think brother and sister is a good analogy of both restaurants.
Yeah. No, it's been a lot of fun, and we've seen a lot of familiar faces. Like, so a lot of our following at the Flute has come down to check us out, which feels really nice. And then we're getting a lot of neighborhood people that like both live and work down in Pioneer Square. So yeah, but we leveraged what they had in the kitchen, so we didn't have to spend a lot of money there. But we did a lot of design work there. Like, there was a lot of painting, a lot of wallpapering, a lot of trim work that we put in. Cause like I said, we vibe old Victorian, like dark, pink. One of my girlfriends, Jessie, she's like, you're like dark anthropology. I'm like, that's great. I'm
dark
like,
anthropology.
These days I'm dirty anthropology. I have 2 big Akitas and no time to clean my house. But anyways, so there was a lot of cosmetic things that we did to make it feel brand appropriate.
Yes. And so now that you've successfully launched 2 restaurants, how have you changed, right? If you looked in the mirror and, were very objective, like how has Brooke changed through this journey?
I feel like I have more sense of freedom. Like I feel lighter in that sense. Like I don't feel as constrained. Like I feel like even though we're running 2 businesses and I haven't traveled, like we haven't gone anywhere other than Vashon Island in 3 years. I have gone back to Montana, but like a couple times. But anyways, like there's still this sense of freedom. I was proud of my accomplishments. Like I would have moments of like pride in like my previous work, but like there's every day I feel proud. Like that, like, okay, we're doing it. Like there's something to be proud of every day. I feel really lucky that I get to do that I've been able to do this. Like that we've launched 2 things successfully, that, we're going to celebrate our 3rd year anniversary in June of the Coop and Flute, which is great. Like, there's a lot of things to weather, and we have a bookkeeper who's awesome. And even though, like, I did financials for my career, I don't do them for the Coop and Flute. I keep an eye on everything, but, like, I don't do them. I have a bookkeeper for that. And it's funny, like, we had our meeting this year, and, like, minimum wage has gone up. There's just been a lot, like, costs of goods have gone up. Like everything is like, it's so much more expensive that to operate today than what it was when we opened 3 years ago. It just is. I mean, every year things get more expensive, but it feels like it's been astronomical in the last few years. And so like, I can't wait to like sit down and look at like my entire year picture with AC and like see and like, we're going into the meeting and I'm just going to ask her, like, is this even viable? Like, is this business even viable? Should I be doing this? Like, and like we sit down together and pull it up and like, look at everything. And like, I sent that to her and she smiled and she's like, do you see this number here? She's like, this is great. She's like, I have, several other businesses that I work with. She's like, that open post-COVID. She goes, you are the only business that's delivering a profit.
Wow, congratulations.
And so that's like, I'm proud of that. Like, we've done that. We've built that. Like, and so that feels good. And we're executing our vision. And so things do change from the business plan. But like at the core of it, we are executing our business plan.
That's awesome. And one of the things I want to remark is that I think, UnLost Cause is really a community for people who are 40 and over who dare to dream and to have the courage to jump. And I think like when you're mentioning how you're proud, I believe that we have better wisdom when we're 40 to be able to take it in and say, wow, I'm proud I did that. Versus like if we had done that in our 20s, it's like, okay, check that box. What's next? What's next? It's always like looking around the corner for the next thing versus like 100%. Being present in the moment and saying, okay, I'm going to give myself some time to be proud. And then I'll look forward to the next challenge versus like, I think when we're younger, it's just like, what's next? And then we lose sight of 100%. That moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, and then if you were on your deathbed and you didn't ever jump or create a restaurant or do something hospitality, how do you think you'd feel?
I think I'd regret it.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny because so many times, like, you talk with people and you're like, I have no regrets. Like, people like are like, I've lived my life and I have no regrets. And nobody wants to have regrets in their life and stuff. But like, I think that had I not ever pursued this and tried it, I think that that would be a major regret for me. Even like before my deathbed, like I think had I gotten to a place of in my 70s or whatever, and like at a place where I'm like, okay, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I try it? Kind of kicking myself. It's funny because when we knew that like we were going to look for a place to open, I was on a business trip and we were out to dinner with a vendor, and the owner of one of our biggest suppliers, who I actually ended up going and working for while we were opening the restaurant, because I ended up leaving Nordstrom and going to work for this gentleman who I'm about to tell you of the exchange that we had. But I worked for him during COVID times, and I worked part-time, and it was beautiful. Like, I commuted, I zoomed in. He's based in New York. I reported directly to him, and it was great. And I'm so grateful. But I remember when I was at Nordstrom and we're sitting at the dinner table and I'm sitting next to him and we were chatting, and I was telling him that, like, we're looking for a place and I'm going to open this champagne tavern, this bar. He's like, why? He's like, why are you going to do that? He's like, restaurants are hard. He's like, the money's not there. Like, I think he's kind of like trying to maybe dad me a little bit there. He's like, the money's just not, like, the profit margins are low. And he's like, why? Why would you do this? And I'm like, and I told him, I said, because I don't want to regret.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to regret not trying. Like I want to try. Like, and I think that I would regret not trying. And then he told me, he's like, well, don't use your own money.
Yeah.
I used all my own money. Well, at the time, like, that's what I thought. But anyways, so that was kind of funny.
Yeah. So
I laugh at that.
no, I think that's certainly true. And I think living with that regret, it can be very toxic, and it can manifest itself in sleepless nights, dissatisfaction at the job, or, just some self-loathing. So, and for anyone who's listening who might think like, well, Brooke was vivacious, she planned, she had that supportive partner, and they think that they're thinking about a dream, but they have an excuse like, I'm too old, I'm too overwhelmed, I'm too busy, I don't deserve a shot. What would you tell them?
You don't know that unless you try.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you got to try. You got to make that herb bread. Yeah, no, I mean, all jokes aside, but like, I did have a partner. I think had Kurt not come into my life, I think that I would have found a way to do my dream. And it might not have looked like what it looks like right now. In fact, it wouldn't look like what it looks like right now. It wouldn't be this full restaurant like beast, up on Beacon Hill. And it would not be, it might be something closer to what the Dandy is at this point. But it probably would have been something smaller. I think that I would have maybe found a way to do a bed and breakfast somewhere eventually. I think is really what it would have ended up being, something that I could do that felt a little bit more within reach without a partner. So I don't think a partner is necessary. It just might not. Your dream you might have to be flexible in what that dream looks like. Like for me, it was always just providing like hospitality and service and cooking to a person. And that can look many different ways.
Wonderful. And, since we're a community in this together, what ask would you like to make or request from our community of listeners?
Come say hi. And if you have questions, talk to me. I'd love to talk to you. But yeah, I mean, clearly, Kurt and I are business owner and operators. He's primarily at the Coop and Flute. I'm at the Coop and Flute on the weekends doing service, but I'm at the Dandy a lot. So down in Pioneer Square is kind of my home base. But seriously, I mean, opening myself up to if you do have questions and want to chat, I'm happy to be a vote of encouragement anyways. But yeah, and come check us out too. We'd love to have you.
Mm-hmm. And if the audience is inspired by your story, how can they support, contact, or follow your journey moving forward, like the socials or whatnot?
Yeah. So most active on Instagram. The Coop and Flute has a Facebook page, but I created it, to be honest, in 2022, and I really haven't gone back onto it. But Instagram is where we do a lot of our social. We do all of our social. The Coop and Flute has a website now. The Coop and Flute Seattle, www.thecoopandfluteseattle.com. The Dandy, we're still working on our website on getting that launched, but we are on Instagram. So give us a follow there, do most of our communicating there. So if we have events or whatnot, that's where they'll be. So, and then the Dandy, right now we're still on very modified hours, Monday through Friday, from 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So that after work drinks and appies or before dinner drink but we will be expanding down into daytime services within the next month and into Saturdays in the next couple of weeks. So excited about that. So hour expansion coming soon at the Dandy, but yeah.
Great. So, I want to just say for anyone visiting Seattle or in Seattle, I highly recommend visiting the Coop and Flute for a glass of bubbly or the Dandy for a distinct cocktail. And if her story sparked something in you, please share this episode. It might be the nudge someone else needs to turn their lost cause into an unlost cause. Brooke, thanks again for sharing your story so candidly. Your journey from retail executive to restaurateur is a toast to second acts and making space for what truly lights you up. Your creativity, courage, and commitment to creating experiences, not just meals, are exactly what this show's about. Thanks again.
Thanks, David. This has been fun.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets. The UnLost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.